Radhe Radhe. So, after our question of the day, I like to open up with a little reading from a book. Today we are reading Roar of the Ganges, which is a book written by Swami Tadatmanandaji, the guru of one of our Sangis, Sky Guardian, who has graciously offered to send our Sangha the book from his guru so that we may read it together. We started reading yesterday the first chapter, which is the introduction about his journey to India from a computer scientist in America to find some of the deepest truths that exist in the ancient cultures all around northern India in particular. I am writing this introduction while staying in the Swami Dayananda Ashram on the banks of the Ganges River in the town of Rishikesh. I returned to India once again, not for further exploration, but to find an inspiring and conducive place to write this book. Here I have no telephone to answer, no classes to teach, no distractions of any kind. I can gaze at majestic mountains and enjoy the ever-present reverberation of the river while I devote myself to the task of writing. Please do not fabricate an image of me sitting under a tree like the sages who once scribed Sanskrit verses onto palm leaves. I am sitting at a desk in a comfortable room writing on a laptop computer. But summer weather here regularly drives the temperature to over 105 degrees Fahrenheit. The scorching heat threatens to destroy the laptop's power module, which is too hot to touch. This computer was not designed for such a fiery environment, nor was my sweat-drenched body. A pre-monsoon squall descended from the mountains a few days ago. Its cyclone-strength winds blew down electric power lines and a few rickety shacks nearby. We were without electricity for 2 days. I was grateful for a break from my writing and took time off to absorb the serene beauty of this holy place. The story that follows is based on my experiences in and around Rishikesh in the early 1990s. Some events that occurred on different trips have been combined for the sake of simplicity and continuity. For the same reasons, several characters are actually composites of people I met. Some names have been changed to protect privacy. The translations of scriptural passages are my own. I have attempted to maintain their poetic flow as much as possible while remaining faithful to the original Sanskrit. Part 1. Seekers and Sadhus. Now, moon emoji. You share that you remember a saint. An American engineer lived at our place. You are from North India. Well, his name is Swami Tadatmanandaji, and I don't have a photo of him at hand, but if you Google his name, you can find a picture of him. That's Swami Tadatmananda. I'm sure Sky Guardian, if he is here, would be happy to write that in chat for you. Here we start with a mantra from the Mandaka Upanishad. Parikshya lokan karma jitan brahmano nirvedam ayan nastya kritah tena. A person of wisdom considers the limits of everything gained through life's empty labors and abandons vain striving when he understands mere action leads not to lasting fulfillment. Thank you, Sky Guardian. The return to Rishikesh, Tuesday, March 7th. The flight from New York was crowded with vacationing Indian American families going home for a visit. They chatted merrily in Hindi, Gujarati, Telugu, and Tamil, some of India's 14 regional languages. The festive mood on the aircraft excited their carefree children, who ran up and down the aisles playfully. Soon, all would be reunited with families and friends eagerly awaiting their return in places like Tiruchirappalli, Bhubaneswar, and perhaps even in the Gangaikonda Chalopuram. I think I can try that one more time. Gangaikonda Cholapuram. I stared out the window at the clouds below, only dimly aware of the commotion in the cabin. I had flown this route several times before. The lengthy flight had become a tedious routine. It was a trip from which I would never return. This strange thought gripped me. Its finality was jolting, even though I knew I was being overly dramatic. All travelers are changed by their journeys. They return home somewhat different than the wayfarers who had left weeks or months before. I reflected on my journey's purpose, my forthcoming initiation as a sannyasi, and came to the bizarre conclusion that on my return flight in a few months, someone else would occupy my seat. Stopping in Amsterdam, a ragged collection of young tourists boarded the plane. The new arrivals, men with dangling earrings and outlandish hairstyles. I almost said Harry Styles. Women in tattered jeans and heavy boots pranced down the aisles, scrutinized by the New York passengers who stared in disbelief. I smiled and wondered what kind of reception these trendy Europeans would receive in India's undeveloped villages, where barefoot men still guide their bullock-drawn plows over ancestral lawns. We arrived in New Delhi at 3 a.m. I felt stale and fatigued after 20 hours on the airliner. Weary travelers in the terminal building piled their bulging suitcases onto handcarts. I waited for my bag, recalling the miserable first day of a previous trip when I arrived in New Delhi without my luggage due to the airline's carelessness, and without hotel reservations due to my own carelessness. I was overjoyed when my travel-worn backpack finally tumbled onto the creaking conveyor. I was on my way to Rishikesh, a small town in the foothills of the Himalayas, about 150 miles north of New Delhi. I had not yet decided how to get there. The only train to Rishikesh would not leave until evening. I had taken the bus many times before, but felt too exhausted to submit myself to 7 bone-jarring hours on a dilapidated bus crammed with villagers carrying live chickens and sacks of rice. After a moment's deliberation, I dragged my pack back to the taxi stand. "Sir, are you wanting a taxi?" A young mustached man behind the counter inquired with a thick accent. "What place are you going, sir?" "Rishikesh," I said sleepily. He pulled out an official chart showing the distance and fares to various destinations. He pointed to the entry for Rishikesh, 490 kilometers round trip. The fare was 3,900 rupees. I knew this was more than 3 times the standard fare. Ye bahut adhik hai. That is too much, I said in Hindi, attempting to convince him that I was not just another gullible tourist to be outrageously overcharged. We bickered for 10 minutes and finally settled on 2,000 rupees. Still exorbitant, but I was too tired to haggle any longer. 2,000 rupees is a week's salary for many breadwinners here, but due to the favorable rate of currency exchange, the 5-hour ride costs only $60. The streets of New Delhi were still quiet at 6 in the morning. The driver steered his antiquated ambassador onto the bridge over the Yamuna River, and soon we were passing through Ghaziabad, Meerut, Muzaffarnagar, and Urukki, towns familiar to me only because the buses to Rishikesh stop at each of them. Towards mid-morning, the narrow highway became congested with speeding cars, buses, and roaring trucks whose horns seemed to shriek, "Get out of my way!" These vehicles shared the undivided road with hordes of scooters, bicycles, and even bullock cars. Children walking to school had to scamper to safety when cars careened onto the wide dirt shoulders. It has been said that people here are highly religious because with only God's grace can you reach your destination safely. To the uninitiated, traffic here looks like sheer chaos. But on closer inspection, I discovered that everyone follows 2 basic rules, and no others. First, the larger vehicle has the right of way. This rule is obvious to anyone with an instinct for survival. Second, each driver is responsible only for what takes place immediately ahead. This rule apparently allows drivers to cut each other off, to pass on either shoulder, and to abandon disabled vehicles in the middle of the road. We passed the mangled remains of a bus and truck still sprawled across the roadway after a head-on collision. In spite of God's grace, serious accidents are a common occurrence. Before lunchtime, we arrived in Rishikesh, the self-proclaimed city of sages. My tattered guidebook says in quaint Indian English that Rishikesh is the gateway to the kingdom of gods. Pilgrimage to sacred places in holy Himalayas began from here. Known from days of yore as a celestial abode, Rishikesh is famous all over as a center of saints and sages. Weary pilgrims can get peace of mind here in many ashrams on the banks of holy Ganges River and receive blessings of pious sadhus. Sadhu is a generic term for sannyasis, yogis, and holy men, hundreds of whom have chosen to reside in Rishikesh. Each summer, thousands more sadhus pass through here en route to pilgrimage sites in the Himalayas. The town's name comes from a Sanskrit epithet for God, Rishikesha, the Lord of Perception. Sometimes its name is incorrectly, but amusingly construed as Rishikesha, literally meaning the hair of the sages, obviously referring to the astonishing dreadlocks worn by many of the itinerant holy men. Near a temple I saw a few who had wound their matted hair into tight buns on the sides of their heads, as ancient sages did once. I wondered if they might inspire the young travelers from Amsterdam to start a new fad in hairstyles. The driver threaded his way down the plain clogged with people, bicycles, and wandering cows. We passed through the main bazaar, where hundreds of tiny shops crowded together along the road. Songs from popular Hindi movies blared from tape players on both sides. On the open counter in a sweet shop, foot-tall pyramids of tasty confection swarmed with flies. The air was thick with dust and smoke, and occasionally the pungent smell of urine. Every time I came to India, my senses were overwhelmed by the profusion of sights, sounds, and smells. I knew that in a few days my senses would again become acclimatized. Beyond the bazaar, we found that the bridge crossing the river Chandrabhaga's wide bed had been reduced to rubble by last year's monsoon rains. It would probably require a couple years to be rebuilt at the usual pace of work here. We crossed its dry riverbed on a temporary road that would certainly be washed away in the next monsoon. Turning away from the main road, we crept through a maze of narrow lanes, stopping once to allow a listless cow to amble out of our way. Finally, we arrived at a metal gate whose sign announced in Hindi and English, Swami Dayananda's Ashram. I sent the driver back with a generous tip. Then I hoisted my backpack and opened the gate in the masonry wall encircling the ashram grounds. Inside, stucco buildings stood on the left and right, facing a large central courtyard. Ashram grounds. Inside, stucco buildings stood on the left and right, facing a large central courtyard. Seems that my internet disconnected me for a second. Do let me know when I have returned. It's back. Thank you for letting me know, Shakira. Alright, why don't we leave there actually? We reached Swami Dayananda's ashram, and later on in this live we may continue his journey. Swami Tadatmanandaji's. We are making our way through the plot as Swami Tadatmanandaji is making his way to spiritual renunciation.